Hello and welcome to the WRAP, WRAL's Politics Podcast. I am your host this week, Will Doran, here with my colleague Paul Specht, and it is just a couple of days until the 2024 election, and this whole thing that we've been doing for all these months might end.
We'll see. We'll see what the lawyers have to say about that.
But the voting will at least be over on Tuesday, and we have one more day of early voting. Saturday ends at 3 p.m. for people who want to get out and vote early. We actually are setting records with early voting this year, which is notable because we set a record in 2020 for overall voter turnout. We had 75% of registered voters in 2020 actually did participate in the elections, which was more than we've ever had. And so far, at least comparing the early voting periods, we are breaking those 2020 records. So
right, and that's not any sort of independent analysis. That comes straight from the State Board of Elections. They sent out a press release today, record broken.
Exactly. We have, as of the time that we are saying this on Friday afternoon, we're above 50% voter turnout already, which I believe was higher than we had in the entire election in 2022 for the midterms. And clearly people are fired up about this. There are high stakes, not just for the presidency, but for plenty of races up and down the ballot. I know that the two of us, plenty of our other colleagues, have been working to profile all those races, whether it's, Supreme Court, Superintendent of Public Instruction, Attorney General, tons of things that you need to be paying attention to. I'll give myself a shameless plug here. I've got a profile on the 1st District congressional seat for the U.S. House, the Don Davis, Lori Buckout race that is, fun fact, the only competitive United States House of Representatives seat in the entire southeastern United States.
Wow. And you sort of took my opportunity to do a segue for you. But I was going to say, the presidential race overlaps with some of these races in some ways. And by that, I mean, earlier this week, Donald Trump was in Rocky Mount. That is near, if not in, that district that you wrote about. And some people think that he was there to bring more turnout, more attention to that race, where to get Lori Buckout, the Republican there, she's challenging Democrat Don Davis, get her more attention in the final stretch. What did you learn while you were writing about that race?
Yeah, no, you were absolutely right that is the reason why that Trump has been in Rocky Mount, and he's coming back to Kinston. If you're like, why is Trump speaking in Kinston? It's because Kinston is also in that 1st District, and both Trump and Harris have spoken in Greenville in the last couple of weeks, which used to be in the district. It got gerrymandered out of it, but it's just over the line now. Between New Mexico and the D.C. suburbs, NC1 is the only toss-up district for the U.S. House of Representatives.
I think that probably goes without maybe. I don't think that you need any special degree to say that's probably a symptom of gerrymandering, maybe.
Certainly. You've also got a lot of just deep red states in there as well. But absolutely gerrymandering plays a role in that. And regardless, this is a race that has millions and millions and millions of dollars pouring in from these outside special interests because Republicans currently only control the House by 3 seats. 435 seats in the U.S. House of Representatives. They have the majority by 3. And so there's been plenty of gerrymandering on both sides. Both parties have done it. And so, Democrats could pick up some seats in other states like New York. And so if Republicans want to hang on to their very slim majority, they're going to need to pick up wins like the 1st District here in North Carolina, currently held by Democrat Don Davis. But we'll see.
Can we talk about the history of that district? It belonged to when was the last time it belonged to a Republican? Ever? Has it ever belonged to a Republican?
Reconstruction.
Yeah, it's been a century. And so this is the first year that they've really the Republicans have thought that they had a chance. Looking at the polling, maybe that's true. What did our most recent poll say about this race and other races? We should get into that big poll we did this week.
Nobody has polled this district. We haven't polled it. No national groups have polled it. The campaigns I'm sure, have polled it, but they haven't made any of their polling public. This is really kind of a black hole of information. But what I did do to analyze it was pull previous election results, because you can dig down to the precinct level. And so you can say, okay, even though this district as it's shaped right now didn't exist in 2016, you can look at how the areas voted and say, okay, if this district did exist back in 2016, it was 9 points to the left of the state in 2016, but it was only 2 points to the left of the state in 2020.
Interesting.
So this is an area of the state that is really shifting to the right. Even as Trump got less popular overall in 2020, he did better in this district. It's moving to the right for sure. And so, Republicans really think that they've got a shot at flipping it. That's why Trump is coming back here to this district, places like Rocky Mount, places like Kinston, to get out the local vote and see if, he can't maybe become president with, full control of Congress as well for the Republicans.
I'm sure that'd be a dream scenario for them. So let's move to some of the other polls that we wrote about this week. WRAL conducted a poll with SurveyUSA between, I think it was it the 20th and the 23rd or the 23rd and the 26th? It was a 3-day period late in October that we polled a bunch of races from the presidential race on downward and talked about some issues as well. Unsurprisingly, I think the economy remains the top issue, along with healthcare. And what was the third one?
Immigration is, of course, really high up for Republican voters, particularly. But there were, guns and crime also remain a big concern for voters. There's plenty of different things that are motivating people.
And we found in the presidential race, neck and neck, we found
a 47-47 tie between Trump and Harris for the presidential race, with the other 6% either undecided or voting third party.
And that appears to track with many other polls from other groups as well, right? I don't know that anyone has Trump or Harris decisively in our state.
Yeah, well, and in 2020, Trump won North Carolina with just under 50% of the vote, and Biden got a little over 48%. So yeah, finding that it's more or less tied is in line with recent history.
Right, and then we have in the race for governor, Josh Stein, the Democrat, still with a double-digit lead over Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson, the Republican candidate.
Yeah, that was notable to me because it's not like these are two separate polls. This was the exact same poll of the exact same voters. And among these people who were tied for Trump and Harris, not even giving an edge one way or another, they had Stein up by 15 points.
Right.
So that's just a large number of Trump supporters who are also not backing Mark Robinson for governor.
Right. And that sort of speaks to not only what's being talked about on the campaign trail in North Carolina, which is abortion. That's a top issue as well. Mark Robinson has a history of making controversial statements about abortion, but also perhaps that story published by CNN in September about comments he made allegedly made on a pornographic website, comments that he denies and that he sued over. But that reporting, along with some of his other past comments, appear to be really dragging down his numbers in the polls.
The further we get away from that CNN report, the less it seems to be doing to his polling numbers. I actually looked into this for this article that we wrote. The polls right after that story came out, had shown a big drop for Robinson. But this poll that we had now, that CNN story was over a month ago.
Right.
And the margin for Stein is not that much bigger right now than it was when we did another poll in early September before that CNN story ever came out.
Interesting.
So it seems that, while in the immediate aftermath of that story, a lot of people were disturbed, maybe some Republican voters have come back around to him. I think part of Robinson's problem is even before that article came out, he just had not done a great job of reaching out to moderate voters, which is, of course, a key constituency that you need here in North Carolina to win. And, he also, I should note, has, like you said, sued CNN, been very forceful saying that this was all false. So maybe there were some Republican voters who have seen those remarks from him, seen those actions from him, and come back on board. That could also be a factor here as well. But let's take a quick break here, and we will come back and talk about some other key races to watch. Stick around. And we are back. Thank you for listening to The Wrap. I am your host, Will Doran, with my colleague Paul Specht, talking about important races to watch. Speaking of the governor's race, the polling in that showed that really, I think the most, the area where the most Republican voters were going over to Stein was in the suburbs, and specifically among suburban women. And I think that's really interesting because for the state legislative races that we have here, there are very, very few competitive districts for the state legislature here where Democrats are trying to break the GOP's supermajority. But those seats tend to be in the suburbs. So I kind of wonder how much that Robinson effect is going to have, even if it doesn't have a drag, say, on Trump statewide. Could it maybe affect, just these individual suburban parts of the state with these competitive legislative races? And that was something that you looked into.
That's right. We have a story coming out before the election, I believe it's Monday, that looks at the strategy Democrats are using to try to break that supermajority. And one thing unique this year is that they're including Mark Robinson, the gubernatorial candidate, in a lot of their ads, which we didn't see in 2020 with Dan Forrest, the gubernatorial nominee then, or 2016 when it was McCrory. There may have been some, but not to this degree. No one was going around saying like, oh, this legislator is a Dan Forrest Republican, like in these ads. But man, that is what they are doing in these attack ads against Republican legislators in swing districts, like you mentioned, around the suburbs of Raleigh and some around Wilmington and eastern North Carolina and Charlotte as well. We looked into which candidates sort of had the most material, because that's what they did. The Democrats did after the CNN report came out. They had compiled all this material of Republicans hosting fundraisers with Robinson or taking photos with him, things like that they can now use to say, oh, look at so-and-so, they're a Mark Robinson Republican, and he said this about abortion. And as you mentioned, our poll found that abortion's a top issue, and Democrats say, according to their polling and their research, Mark Robinson is more disliked than any Republican gubernatorial nominee in recent history. So when they ask voters about him and about legislative candidates, in their research groups, what that means, they got really negative reactions. That's why he's appearing in all these ads. Will it work? Republicans say they're not seeing any evidence that North Carolina has a long history of splitting its ballot between a Republican for president, a Democrat for governor, and then a mixed bag down the line. And they say, the strategists say, they're not seeing much evidence yet that Robinson is rubbing off on some of these legislative candidates. So we'll have to watch and see, and feel free to go on WRAL.com on Monday to find this story and see their exact comments and read about some of the attacks.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a big issue that I think does get lost by some voters, just control of the legislature, because we have such a weak governor here in North Carolina that...
And that means by power, not by personality by any means. It just means the state has, over the years, given him fewer powers than other states give their governor.
Exactly. And, if Democrats don't have the ability to break a GOP supermajority, then the governor can't really do a lot. They can get up and give speeches and travel the state and, whip people up. But in terms of just real power to do stuff, I mean, the legislature has taken away a lot of the power that the governor used to have ever since Roy Cooper came into power. And if Democrats are able to break that supermajority and say it's a Josh Stein governor, he would have a lot of leverage to negotiate with Republicans on the budget, things like that. But if they're not able to break that supermajority, then Republicans can keep just doing essentially whatever they want. Right. So Democrats are going to be trying very, very hard in those just a handful of seats. It's the suburbs just north of Raleigh, just south of Raleigh, around the Charlotte area, around Wilmington. It's really, really fascinating to just watch those, few little pockets of the state get to decide basically who holds all of the power going into it.
Right. And so, Democrats may see their ranks diminish in some other races as well, one being Josh Stein's seat. He's currently the Attorney General. Democrats have held that office in North Carolina for, decades now, I believe. Have they?
Again, since Reconstruction.
Right.
The last time a Republican was elected to be the Attorney General of North Carolina.
So there's a competitive race to replace him between two congressmen out of the Charlotte area. The Democrat is Jeff Jackson. The Republican is Dan Bishop.
Both sitting U.S. congressmen, which is incredibly rare and kind of odd.
Right. I think more rare for Bishop to run for it, considering he could have stayed in Congress. The lines for Jackson's district changed, so he was sort of drawn out, he would say. That's why he's in the race. And they're both attorneys, of course. Our polling found that race pretty close as well.
Yes, and that's another one where the Jeff Jackson campaign has tried really, really hard to tie Dan Bishop to Mark Robinson. And, Dan Bishop is, famously the author of HB 2 from back in 2016. He's a member of the Freedom Caucus in Congress. He's, certainly not a moderate here. But those ads really, it appears, haven't really worked. I mean, Jackson is ahead a little bit in our polling, but it really seems to be tracking much more with the presidential race than with the governor's race. Even though it's another statewide office, it seems to not really be following the same trends as that governor's race. It really seems to just be following the presidential race, maybe slightly to the left, but certainly not by any large margins.
The ads in that race are unique, too, because we see the Democrats trying to associate Bishop with Robinson, who he is a fan of, I believe, and they've appeared together and things like that. Jeff Jackson is also a younger congressman and is sort of famous, in political circles at least, for his social media use. He goes on TikTok and makes these videos, and goes on Twitter and puts out these videos of himself talking to the camera. And they all look exactly the same, right?
Right.
But his strategy is he tries to be as plain-spoken as possible and come across as honest as possible, sort of a Mr. Smith Goes to Washington type appeal. And so we see those ads playing out. Meanwhile, on the other side, Dan Bishop is running an ad saying, accusing Jackson of, quote, embracing a sex offender.
You looked into these claims, right? You did a fact check of this ad?
That's right. Right. So the basics are the ad shows Jackson hugging a man named Chad Turner. He is the president and CEO of a Chamber of Commerce out in Charlotte, and he's been an advocate for LGBTQ rights for a while now. And in 2022, his group gave Jeff Jackson and other people and businesses awards for their work in the community. Well, Turner, back in 1998, when he was 20, was accused of lewd acts with someone under the age of 16. They were 15. So Turner was 20. The victim was 15. He was convicted of that and is now a registered sex offender. Bishop is putting this in his ad and saying, hey, look, here is evidence of Jackson embracing Turner, because when he accepted the award, he gave Turner a hug. Turner's the one that gave it to him on stage. But Jackson says he didn't know about Turner's background when he accepted that award, and pointed out that he's not the only one that received it. This was not Jeff Jackson night. This was a night where a bunch of people received awards, including NASCAR, which I think is an interesting detail. The ad also features a clip of Jackson's speech where he says, thank you for all the work you've done. That's presented without context. He was speaking to the room. If you look, he's looking out at the audience, not at Turner specifically, but the Bishop ad then pans to voters who say, oh, everyone knew about this guy. How did he not know? Well, Jackson claims he didn't, and people can read about their back and forth now. Jackson's attorney sent a letter to Bishop Bishop called Jackson's claims ridiculous. It's all in our fact check that's on WRAL.com.
Yeah, I mean, this has been a really nasty race back and forth. Jackson's campaign is, sending these, strongly worded legal letters about this ad to Dan Bishop. Dan Bishop actually sued Jeff Jackson's campaign earlier this year for defamation over a push poll that they had sent out that he said was falsely accusing him of doing some seedy things when he was a lawyer.
What would a race between two lawyers be without some threatening letters shared between the two?
Exactly. So, but again, that one I think just, goes to speak to how competitive that is. And also it's a big deal. I spoke earlier about how the governor's office here in North Carolina doesn't have a ton of power. The attorney general actually does have a lot of power. You can really, wield the levers of state government to go after or not go after big companies. You handle all of our criminal appeals. You do a lot of consumer protection stuff. And so it's an important office, and national groups have spent lots and lots of money on both sides trying to win that. One of many that we will be tracking here at WRAL. Probably the next time you hear from us, it'll be after the election. But of course, we will have tons of content on TV, on our website, on social media, every other kind of platform between now and then. So please stay tuned. Please go vote if you haven't already. Get it done. It matters. We have very close races here in North Carolina. Your vote actually does matter. And with that note, we'll see you next time.